Welcome back, dear listener, to Sleep Theory TV. Tonight we travel far back in time, to the heart of ancient Egypt. The air is warm, heavy with the scent of the river and the sand. The sun has just slipped beneath the western horizon, and the last blush of gold fades behind the desert hills. The day's voices grow quiet, and the Nile begins to whisper to the stars. The surface of the water glows faintly, reflecting a pale silver from the rising moon. Papyrus reeds sway gently at the edges of the current, and somewhere nearby, a heron moves with slow, deliberate steps. The sound of insects hums softly, a natural rhythm that might have accompanied the dreams of countless souls thousands of years ago. The people of the ancient land are settling into the calm of night. In small mud-brick homes along the riverbank, oil lamps flicker, casting pools of amber light across simple clay floors. Women draw the last jars of water for the evening, lifting them with practiced ease, their bracelets glinting in the dimness. Children yawn, wrapped in linen cloths, listening to the lullaby of the water outside. In the distance, a temple stands, its columns vast, its carvings alive in the moonlight. The eyes of the gods seem to glimmer faintly from the walls. The priests have finished their rituals for the day, and the temple's inner chambers are now bathed in silence. Only the steady crackle of a torch and the scent of incense remain. Frankincense, myrrh, and the memory of prayer. As night deepens, the desert breathes. Winds move across the sands, cooling the stones that had burned under the sun's gaze. The stars appear, one by one, then all at once. Bright and ancient, unchanging. The same constellations that guided the farmers, the builders, the priests, and the pharaohs. To the ancient Egyptians, these stars were not distant fires in the sky. They were gods, spirits, guardians of eternity. Each shimmer of light carried meaning, each constellation a story that connected heaven and earth. The night sky was a living map of belief, and to gaze upon it was to be reminded that life, like the river, flowed endlessly from one world to the next. Tonight, you are standing on the river's edge. You can hear the slow lap of water against stone. You can feel the sand beneath your feet, still warm from the day. The horizon is vast and dark, but filled with life. Unseen life, quiet life. The kind of stillness that invites reflection. The kind of stillness that helps one drift into sleep. A fisherman glides by in his small wooden boat. His torch burns low, reflected in the ripples behind him. He hums softly, a tune his father might have sung, and his father before that. Fishing by night was common here. The Nile was generous, and the darkness was gentle. In the cool air, voices carry far. You can hear a faint conversation from the opposite bank. Two men speaking in a language that is both foreign and familiar. The language of beginnings. Farther inland, the fields lie resting. The crops, barley, wheat, flax, are still, waiting for dawn. The irrigation canals glimmer faintly like threads of silver. Beyond them, the silhouettes of palm trees stand tall and unmoving, their fronds stirring only when the breeze drifts through. The air smells faintly of earth and grain, of wet clay and the sweetness of lotus flowers blooming along the shore. It is said that in ancient Egypt, night was not feared. It was not a void, but a journey. a sacred part of the cycle. Just as the sun sailed across the heavens by day, it travelled through the underworld at night. The god Ra, in his solar bark, was believed to descend into darkness each evening, sailing through the realm of shadows to battle the serpent of chaos, Apophis. And when dawn came, Ra was victorious, reborn, renewed. So every sunset was a promise. Every night was a reminder that even in darkness there was order, purpose, and the certainty of light's return. That is why sleep too was sacred. Dreams were messages, sometimes from ancestors, sometimes from gods. To close one's eyes in ancient Egypt was to embark on a miniature version of Ra's journey. To drift through mystery and emerge with dawn. The night deepens still. The moon climbs higher, bathing the pyramids far to the north in a faint blue glow. Their edges gleam like sharp horizons of eternity. In the shadow of those monuments, time seems suspended. Centuries fold into one another. The builders who once stood beneath these same stars would have known this same sound. The sigh of wind, the whisper of the sand, the calm of the river. If you listen closely, you can almost hear them. The quiet rhythm of chisels striking stone, the soft murmur of prayer as they set each block into place, invoking divine precision. Their work was an act of faith, not in power, but in permanence, in the belief that stone, shaped by human hands, could hold eternity. Now, let your mind drift as theirs once did, between wakefulness and sleep. Imagine the cool night air on your skin, the flicker of a torch nearby, the soft rustle of linen as you lie down on a woven mat. A simple life, surrounded by the steady, soothing pulse of the Nile. A sound that has never stopped. Somewhere in the darkness, a temple gong sounds once, low and resonant, calling unseen spirits to attention. The priests walk slowly through the colonnade, carrying lamps shaped like lotuses. Their light touches the hieroglyphs carved into the pillars, making them seem alive. As though the gods themselves are stirring, ready to listen to prayers spoken in whispers. You take a slow breath. The air is still warm, heavy with the scent of stone and incense. The stars above seem endless now, spreading across the heavens like a painted ceiling, the Milky Way. To the Egyptians, this was not just a river of stars. It was the heavenly reflection of the Nile itself, flowing across the night sky. As above, so below. The two rivers, one of water, one of light, mirrored each other in perfect balance. In this moment, you feel the same quiet awe that ancient eyes must have felt. You feel small but not insignificant. You feel part of something vast, gentle, and eternal. Let the stillness deepen. Let the sounds of the night carry you further into this ancient calm. The day has ended. The world rests. And in the heart of Egypt, the night begins its slow, endless song. The river widens as it bends eastward. From above it looks almost motionless, but at its heart the current never sleeps. The people of Egypt understood this constant movement as the pulse of their world, the vein through which life itself flowed. Even now, under the cover of darkness, the Nile hums quietly with that same eternal rhythm. A crocodile drifts near the far bank, half hidden by reeds. Its eyes glint with the same light that touches the moonlit water. To the Egyptians, this creature was more than an animal. It was sacred to Sobek, the god of strength and fertility, protector of the river's might. Somewhere near a small temple dedicated to him, a priest might still be awake, tending a single flame in the shrine. A small, steadfast glow to honor the guardian of the waters. Beyond the river's edge, the land stretches into a patchwork of small fields. The farmers who tilled them rest now, their tools laid aside. Their hands, roughened by work, curl loosely in sleep. Above their roofs, the soft murmurs of night animals continue. Frogs croaking, owls calling from distant date palms. The night sounds are never fully silent here. They are the breath of the living earth. Not far away, a group of travelers move slowly along a dirt path. They are merchants returning from the delta, their donkeys laden with baskets of grain and cloth. They walk without torches, guided only by the faint silver of starlight and the memory of the road. The bells on the donkeys' harnesses chime softly with each step. An almost musical rhythm that merges with the whisper of the sand beneath their feet. In the cities, the night has its own kind of life. Thebes, Memphis, and smaller towns alike glow faintly from scattered oil lamps that mark the doorways of homes. The streets are narrow and winding, built to follow the natural contours of the land. Here and there, laughter echoes, soft and brief, from people still awake, sharing stories to fill the cooler hours before sleep. Inside one of these homes, a scribe sits by a low table. His lamp burns weakly, its oil nearly spent. On the table rests a strip of papyrus, half covered in neat rows of inked hieroglyphs. His stylus moves slowly, tracing the final lines of a hymn to the goddess Isis, protector of families, healer of the sick, mother of magic. When he finishes, he places the reed pen beside the scroll, stretches his fingers, and blows out the flame. The darkness folds around him like a blanket, and the world returns to silence. High above the sleeping land, the stars trace their endless arc. The Egyptians believed that each soul, after death, joined these stars in the heavens, sailing across the sky in eternal company. To look upward was to look at the ancestors themselves, shimmering with quiet constancy. The constellation we call Orion was for them Osiris, lord of the afterlife. Nearby, the bright star Sirius was his wife Isis, whose rising each year foretold the flood of the Nile and the renewal of all life. Imagine standing beneath that same sky. You tilt your head back, and the immensity of it fills your vision. The air feels cooler now. A faint wind moves through the palms, carrying with it the scent of water and sand. Each breath you take seems slower, deeper, more deliberate. In this stillness, time loosens its grip. You are no longer bound to the present. You drift between centuries. You find yourself walking through the outskirts of a village, where the houses are simple, flat-roofed, their walls built from sun-baked mud brick. The night has softened everything. Edges blur, and the world seems carved from shadow and silver. A dog lifts its head as you pass, watching quietly, tail motionless. The animal gives a single, low bark, then settles again, curling into a circle beside the door of its sleeping master. Further on, the scent of baking lingers faintly in the air. Earlier, just before sunset, the women of the household baked bread in small clay ovens, shaping each loaf carefully, pressing the surface with seeds or herbs. Now, the warmth from those ovens radiates gently through the walls, a slow release of comfort that seeps into the cool air of night. The rhythm of daily life, even in sleep, continues. In the temples, guards walk the perimeters with measured steps, their spears glinting briefly as they pass beneath the moon. In the royal storehouses, jars of honey, wine, and oil rest in careful rows. Cats, sleek, watchful, prowl between them, keeping mice away. Each creature, each person, has its role in the quiet harmony of the kingdom. At the edge of the village, near the fields, stands a small shrine to the god Min, symbol of fertility and growth. Offerings lie before it, a few flowers, a cup of beer, a handful of barley. These gestures, though humble, are sincere. For the people, the gods are not distant figures on a throne of clouds, but companions who walk among them, listening, sometimes silent, sometimes speaking through dreams. Dreams. The night in Egypt was filled with them. Dreams that guided, warned, healed, or comforted. The people believed that as they slept, their spirits wandered. They might visit the realm of the gods or meet the shades of ancestors who offered advice. Some dreams were recorded, inscribed carefully on papyrus, and stored in temples for priests to interpret. Even pharaohs sought such guidance, trusting that the unseen world spoke most clearly in the quiet hours of darkness. As you continue along the path, the horizon glows faintly, not with sunlight, but with the cool shimmer of moonlight on distant limestone cliffs. These are the Theban hills, where tombs are carved deep into the rock. Inside them the air is still and cool. The walls are alive with color. Blues, reds, and golds that tell the stories of the soul's journey. In the flicker of torchlight, the painted figures seem to move. Ra sailing his boat through the underworld, Osiris seated on his throne of judgment, the scales weighing the heart against the feather of truth. In the quiet of night, such images are not frightening but strangely soothing. They speak of order, of a universe where everything has its place. Life, death, rebirth, all parts of a great rhythm as natural as the breathing of the world itself. You pause near the entrance of one such tomb. The torchlight inside trembles faintly, revealing a worker brushing dust from the carvings. His face is calm, his movements slow and respectful. For him, this is not just labor, but devotion. Every stroke of his brush, every careful clearing of stone, is an act of reverence for the one who sleeps within. Outside, the wind picks up. Sand drifts softly across the ground, whispering against the walls. The worker extinguishes his torch and steps out into the moonlight. He takes a moment to gaze at the stars before walking home, his footprints quickly fading behind him. You stand alone now, surrounded by silence, yet it is not emptiness you feel, it is presence. The kind of silence that hums quietly with life, with memory, with the pulse of an ancient world still breathing just beneath the surface of time. The night will continue for many hours yet. The stars will wheel slowly westward, Somewhere, a temple gong will sound again, marking the midpoint between sunset and dawn. And in the homes by the river, dreams will deepen, dreams of harvest, of family, of gods who walk beside the Nile. The wind moves gently through the valley, carrying with it a fine mist of sand that glitters faintly in the moonlight. The scent of the desert drifts over the land, dry, ancient and clean, as if time itself had a fragrance. Somewhere far away, a jackal's cry echoes once, sharp and lonely, then fades into the vastness. To the Egyptians, this sound was sacred. The jackal belonged to Anubis, guardian of the dead and keeper of the tombs. His voice at night was not a warning, but a reminder that the boundary between life and eternity was thin, and that both worlds coexisted beneath the same stars. A traveller rests near a cluster of acacia trees. His small fire burns low, its smoke rising in a narrow thread toward the sky. He unwraps a simple meal: bread, dried figs, a little honey, and eats slowly, watching the embers glow. His mind wanders to thoughts of home, of family asleep beside the river's edge. He imagines the coolness of the water, the soft murmur of voices, and the sound of oars dipping into the current. These images bring comfort. The desert can be harsh, but in its silence there is a peace that seeps deep into the heart. He lies back, gazing upward. The Milky Way stretches across the heavens like a pale road. The path of souls, the celestial Nile. To him, it is not an empty sky, but a map of stories. He whispers a small prayer to the goddess Nut, whose great body forms the vault of heaven, her arms and legs stretching from horizon to horizon. She is the mother of stars, the one who swallows the sun each evening and gives birth to it again at dawn. He asks her to watch over his journey, then closes his eyes. The fire crackles softly, then dwindles. The desert cools around him, and he drifts into sleep. The world continues to turn in its slow, ancient rhythm. Back along the real Nile, the river's edge glows faintly in the moonlight. A group of musicians gathers near a dock, their instruments simple but full of life. A small harp, a flute carved from reed, a shallow drum. Their music floats across the water like a dream, low and rhythmic, repeating phrases that seem to circle endlessly. It is not a performance, but a prayer disguised as song. The melody honors Hathor, goddess of joy and beauty, who was said to dance through the night sky wearing a crown of stars. The music drifts to a nearby boat, where a young couple sits together, their fingers intertwined. They say nothing, content with the gentle rocking of the water beneath them. The world feels still, as if time itself has paused to listen. Above them, a shooting star crosses the heavens, a brief flash, like a spark from the forge of the gods. On the opposite bank, the walls of a small temple rise from the darkness. The carvings are deep and elegant, their forms softened by centuries of wind. Inside, a single priest remains awake. He tends the sacred flame before the statue of Khonsu, the god of the moon. The light of both fire and moon mingle on the polished stone, casting moving shadows that seem almost alive. The priest murmurs an ancient verse, words of praise, gratitude, and protection. His voice is slow and steady, like the flow of the river outside. When he finishes, he bows deeply and leaves the chamber, closing the heavy wooden door behind him. The flame continues to burn, alone but unwavering. The night deepens further. The moon climbs toward its highest point. Shadows grow long and sharp across the land. The air is cool now, the kind of coolness that carries the scent of water and stone. Even the animals grow quieter, as if the entire world holds its breath. This is the hour of stillness, when all movement ceases and the line between dream and waking becomes thin as silk. Somewhere in a distant palace, the pharaoh sleeps. The great house of the living god is quiet. Servants move softly through the corridors, carrying bowls of oil to keep the lamps from dying. In the royal chambers, a curtain stirs faintly with the breeze. The ruler dreams of the sun's journey, of battles long past, of gods who speak in the language of symbols. To rule Egypt was not merely to govern land and people, it was to balance the world, to uphold Ma'at, the sacred order, the harmony between heaven, earth, and the underworld. Even in sleep, that duty remains. In a nearby courtyard, lotus flowers open upon the water of a shallow pool. By day they close beneath the sun, but at night they unfold, pale and glowing, as if gathering the light of the stars. The scent is delicate, almost sweet, and drifts across the stones. A cat walks along the edge of the pool, its paws silent. It pauses to drink, its reflection rippling across the surface. Farther away, the guards at the city gate lean on their spears, half dozing, eyes flicking towards the horizon. Nothing moves. The desert beyond is an ocean of stillness. One of them hums softly under his breath, a tune to keep himself awake. He thinks of his family sleeping in the city, of his little daughter who asked him that morning why the moon follows them at night. He smiles at the memory, looking up at the sky, and decides that perhaps the moon simply likes to watch over those it loves. The night passes slowly, as all ancient nights do, measured not in hours, but in breaths, in the soft rhythm of life that continues unseen. In the distance, over the dark water, the first faint hint of light appears. Not yet dawn, but the promise of it. The stars begin to pale, one by one, fading into the coming glow. The priests in the temples will soon rise to greet the sun with hymns. The farmers will stir, readying their tools. The Nile will shimmer again beneath the first touch of gold. But for now, the night still holds. Its final moments are the quietest of all. That thin, weightless pause before the birth of a new day. You breathe slowly. The air feels softer. The world is still wrapped in shadow, but it is a gentle, comforting shadow, the kind that invites rest, not fear. The sound of the river continues, steady and patient. Its rhythm is the same one that has carried life through this land for thousands of years. You close your eyes. The stars above you have begun to fade, but you can still feel their presence, like distant hearts beating in the sky. Somewhere within that vastness the gods watch, eternal and calm. The river flows, the earth breathes, and you drift, as the ancients once did, into a deeper, quieter dream. Thebes, city of temples and kings, rests quietly beneath the night sky. By day, it is alive with the rhythm of trade, prayer, and royal ceremony. By night it exhales, The markets close, the river traffic slows, and the echo of voices fades between the high walls. Thebes at night is not empty. It is simply transformed. A vast network of shadows and silence, breathing in time with the Nile. Along the main streets, the last merchants shutter their stalls. The smell of spice lingers in the air. Cinnamon, cumin, and incense brought from the southern lands of Punt. Stray dogs wander, nosing at scraps left behind. The dust settles after a long day of footsteps, leaving only the faint marks of sandals in the sand. The city's skyline is defined by its temples. At the southern edge stands Luxor, and to the north, the massive complex of Karnak. Even in darkness, their columns tower like forest trunks. The obelisks catch the moonlight on their polished tips, and the hieroglyphs carved along their sides seem almost alive. The priests move softly within, their torches lighting the sacred corridors. Inside the temple of Amun, the great god of Thebes, the air is thick with the scent of oil and lotus. Statues of the gods stand in silent ranks, their faces lit by flickering flame. The inner sanctuary, the Holy of Holies, remains sealed until morning, when the daily rituals begin. The temple's night watch walks its perimeter with slow steps, touching each wall in a gesture of reverence as they pass. Religion was the heartbeat of Theban life, and even at night, that rhythm never ceased. The gods were not confined to daylight. Their presence filled every hour. The moon was itself divine, the visible face of Khonsu, the lunar god who watched over travelers and time. His name meant the Wanderer, for he crossed the sky night after night, steady and faithful. The priests of Khonsu would sometimes remain awake through the darkness, studying the stars from the temple roofs. To them, the heavens were a text, and every movement of light had meaning. In the lower quarters of the city, the homes of artisans cluster together in narrow streets. These are the builders, the painters, the sculptors, those whose hands shape eternity in the tombs across the river. The homes are modest, their walls coated in white plaster, their doors marked with protective symbols of the gods Bez or Taweret. Within, the rooms are simple: a hearth, a few mats, clay jars, woven baskets and tools. When the day's heat fades, families gather in the courtyards to eat. The evening meal is humble: bread made from emmer wheat, lentils, onions, perhaps a little fish from the Nile, or figs from a nearby grove. The cool air brings quiet conversation. The flicker of oil lamps casts long, dancing shadows against the walls. Children play with small clay animals or toss pebbles in the dust before being sent to bed. The elders tell stories of the gods and of heroes, tales of Horus and Set, or of the trickster god Thoth, who once gambled with the moon to win time for the world. These stories, older than memory, flow through generations, keeping the past alive. As the lamps burn low, the sound of the city softens. From the rooftops, one can see the faint glow of fires in the distance. Perhaps a caravan camped beyond the walls, or fishermen preparing to set out along the river. Thebes is never entirely still. Even in sleep, its pulse continues. Across the Nile, on the western bank, lies the city of the dead. a vast necropolis that mirrors the living city. Here, tomb builders work by torchlight deep within the cliffs, carving chambers for kings and nobles. Deir el-Medina, the workers' village, remains active longer than the city itself. The artisans there often labor late into the night, guided by the dim orange glow of oil lamps. They are a unique community, skilled, organized, and protected by the state. Their work is sacred. Each wall they paint, each hieroglyph they inscribe, is part of the pharaoh's passage into eternity. The tombs are not mere resting places. They are books written in color and stone, meant to guide the soul through the afterlife. The night hours in Deir el-Medina are quiet but purposeful. Some workers mix pigments, ochre, malachite, carbon black, while others smooth plaster or prepare tools for the next day. In small shrines, they leave offerings to the goddess Meretzega, she who loves silence, protector of the Theban mountain. Her presence is felt in every gust of desert wind that sweeps through the valley. Beyond the cliffs, the Valley of the Kings lies silent under the stars. The entrances to the tombs are hidden among the rocks, marked only by subtle signs known to the workers. Inside, the corridors twist downward into the earth, leading to chambers where the walls blaze with color. Even in darkness, the art endures. Ra's sailing across the underworld, stars surrounding the goddess Nut, the pharaoh embraced by Osiris. The air is still and dry, unchanged for millennia. Back in Thebes, the river separates the two worlds, the living and the dead, yet binds them together. Boats drift silently across the water, their sails lowered, moving by the steady pull of the current. Ferrymen know these routes by memory. Some carry goods, others carry offerings for the tombs, wrapped in linen and sealed with clay. The water reflects the light of the stars, and each ripple seems like the breath of the gods themselves. The night also belongs to the astronomers, the watchers of the sky. Atop the temples they lie on their backs, studying the movement of stars across the zenith. From their observations, the Egyptians created calendars that guided agriculture, festivals, and rituals. The rising of Sirius each year marked the coming flood of the Nile, the beginning of the new year. These nightly observations linked heaven to earth, ensuring that the rhythms of both remained in harmony. Even the simplest citizen of Thebes understood this connection. The stars were not distant. They were ancestors, deities, and timekeepers. To look up at them was to see the divine order itself, woven across the heavens. As the night deepens, the temperature falls. A soft mist begins to rise from the river, curling around the docks and drifting through the lower streets. Lamps flicker within the houses, their light dulled by the fog. Somewhere in the city, a scribe continues to work, copying an old story. Perhaps the tale of Sinew, or the shipwrecked sailor. The scratch of his reed pen is almost lost in the quiet. Nearby, a potter finishes his task shaping a final vessel before setting it aside to dry. The clay is cool beneath his hands, its texture smooth and familiar. He wipes his palms on his tunic and steps outside, gazing toward the temples. Even from here, he can see the faint glow of torches near the entrance of Karnak. He murmurs a short prayer to Ptah, patron of craftsmen, before returning to his small home. By midnight, Thebes has surrendered fully to stillness. The only movement comes from the river and the occasional call of a night bird. The moon hangs high, bright enough to illuminate the outlines of the pylons and statues. The colossal figures of Rameses II stand motionless, their faces serene. Once, these stones heard the noise of ceremonies and crowds. Now they hear only the whisper of the wind. Time feels different here. Each night is a reflection of thousands before it. The same stars that watched over these streets still shine today, unchanging. The lives that unfolded beneath them, the prayers, the labors, the hopes, have faded into dust, yet their echo remains in the stones. Night in Thebes is more than the absence of light. It is the presence of continuity. The city sleeps, but its memory does not. It endures in every carved wall, every painted tomb, every line of scripture. Thebes rests in its own eternity, balanced between silence and immortality. Thebes is vast, yet at night it feels smaller. A collection of quiet moments strung together by the river's murmur. The sounds that filled the daylight. The shouts of traders, the ring of bronze tools, the cries of children have melted away. Only the soft rhythm of night remains, steady as breath. The city is divided into layers. Closest to the river are the docks and markets, where boats from the north and south meet. Behind them rise the houses of merchants and scribes, then the grand estates of nobles and priests, and finally the towering walls of temples and palaces. Even in silence, the structure of Thebes is evident. Each tier of life connected to the others like branches of a sacred tree. Near the docks, a few small taverns stay open late. Their doors are marked with symbols of protection, eyes of Horus painted in blue, or the image of the dwarf god Bez, who drives away misfortune. Within, men sit on low stools, drinking beer from clay jars, speaking in low tones about the river's levels or the latest decrees from the palace. Their laughter is brief, restrained, respectful of the hour. A woman with a small harp plays a quiet tune in the corner. The melody of a harvest song slowed to match the stillness of night. The beer they drink is thick and sweet, brewed from barley and flavored with dates or honey. It is the same drink shared by workers and nobles alike, though in different vessels. For the common people it is a source of nourishment. For the wealthy, a pleasure offered at banquets or rituals. Even the gods receive beer as offering. A reminder that divine and mortal life are made of the same elements. Farther inland, in the noble district, the air smells of oil lamps and perfumed resins. The villas are spacious, with gardens enclosed by high walls. Pools reflect the stars, their surfaces covered with lotus blossoms that close as the night cools. Servants move quietly through the corridors, checking the lamps, preparing bedding, or carrying messages between rooms. The rhythm of work continues even in stillness. In one such house, a nobleman reclines on a low couch, speaking with his wife. They discuss the harvest, the temple offerings they will make, and the latest reports from the workers restoring an old tomb. Their children sleep nearby, watched by a servant who hums an old lullaby to herself. The household is calm, held together by quiet order. The Egyptians valued stability, but above all else. This idea, the balance between chaos and harmony, shaped every aspect of life. Even at night, when the world darkened and the sun descended into the underworld, they believed that Maat continued to govern creation. The city's order, its people's rest, and the river's steady flow were all expressions of that sacred balance. Not far from the noble quarter stands the house of a high priest of Amun. It is a place of learning and devotion, its library filled with papyri written in careful hieratic script. Within, younger priests study by lamplight, their eyes following the inked lines of hymns and rituals. The air smells faintly of papyrus and soot, and the sound of turning scrolls is as soft as the whisper of wings. The text they study tonight is old, a hymn to the sun god, written centuries before their time. The words remind them that every night Ra journeys through the Duat, the unseen world beneath the earth. In that realm, he meets the souls of the dead, battles the serpent of darkness, and ensures that dawn will return. For the priests, the quiet hours of study are not empty. They are part of this same eternal cycle, a vigil for the renewal of the world. Outside the priest's house, a guard passes by. His footsteps echo faintly against the stone. The guards of Thebes are not soldiers of war, but keepers of peace. Their rounds are long and methodical. They carry torches or small lanterns, checking doors and gates, watching for fire or unrest. The city trusts them to protect its sleeping life. Some hum under their breath to stay awake. Others speak softly to the stray cats that follow them. Creatures sacred to Bastet, the goddess of home and protection. Near the edge of the city stands the palace complex, partly hidden by high walls. Even at this hour, light glows from certain windows. Messengers move through the courtyards, carrying tablets of clay or papyrus scrolls sealed with wax. A few scribes remain awake, recording trade receipts, grain tallies, or reports from distant provinces. For Egypt's administration, the flow of information is as constant as the Nile itself. Within one chamber, a royal physician prepares ointments and poultices from herbs stored in small alabaster jars. He grinds dried lotus petals with oil from the moringa tree, murmuring the names of the ingredients as he mixes them. Part science, part incantation. Medicine in Egypt is both craft and magic, inseparable from the divine. Each treatment is accompanied by prayer. Each cure invokes the protection of the gods. Beyond the palace walls, the streets grow narrower again. The scent of freshly baked bread lingers in the air, drifting from communal ovens that still radiate warmth. In the distance, the faint ringing of metal echoes. Perhaps a craftsman repairing tools by lamplight, or a bronze worker shaping a small amulet before dawn. These sounds weave through the night like threads of continuity, reminders that even in darkness, the world is never idle. In the courtyards of humbler homes, the rhythm of life continues in smaller ways. Women draw water from jars and pour it over cool clay floors to settle the dust. A man sits at his doorway repairing a fishing net, the fibers glistening faintly in the moonlight. A group of children, unable to sleep, whisper stories to one another, their voices barely rising above the hum of the insects. And above it all, the sky, always the sky. The Milky Way arcs high, bright and soft. To the Egyptians, this was the heavenly reflection of the Nile, a celestial river flowing with the souls of the righteous. They believed that when a person lived in harmony with Ma'at, their heart would be lighter than the feather of truth, and they would join the imperishable stars. The night sky, therefore, was not distant or cold. It was home, a promise of eternity visible to every eye that looked upward. As the night passes, the temperature drops further. The wind off the desert carries a chill that seeps into the stone walls. Guards pull their cloaks tighter. Dogs curl beside doorways. The river, however, remains constant, its motion unbroken, its surface smooth. Thebes sleeps, but the Nile never does. Across its waters, on the western bank, the tombs gleam faintly under the moon. The ancient Egyptians called this side of the river the land of the setting sun, for it belonged to those who had completed life's journey. The living city and the city of the dead face each other across the river like reflections, two halves of one existence. Every sunrise, the ferrymen carry offerings westward, bread, beer, flowers, and words, to nourish the spirits of the departed. Every sunset, they return east, carrying the same sense of continuity back to the living. In this rhythm, Thebes found its immortality. The people believed that by honoring both the light and the dark, they could preserve balance forever. The night was not an ending, but a necessary silence, a pause between the heartbeats of creation. As the horizon begins to pale, faint and cold, the city prepares to awaken. The priests of Amun will soon open the temple gates for the morning rites. The workers in Deir el-Medina will cross the river, tools in hand. The nobleman will rise to receive petitions. The merchant will unbar his door. But for a few remaining moments, Thebes belongs entirely to the night, to the quiet, to the stars, and to the slow, eternal song of the river. The night sky above Egypt is unlike any other. Immense, brilliant, unbroken by clouds. Over the slow curve of the Nile, it stretches from horizon to horizon, so wide that it seems to cradle the earth itself. To those who lived along its banks thousands of years ago, this was not merely a sky. It was a living canvas, filled with movement, with purpose, and with the silent presence of the gods. The Egyptians did not see darkness as absence. They saw it as a realm alive with divine order. Every star, every shadow, every breath of the wind across the desert carried meaning. To look upward at night was to gaze into the structure of eternity. They called the sky Pet, the great vault that arched above the world. It was personified as the goddess Nut, whose vast body stretched across the heavens, fingertips and toes touching the horizon. By day she swallowed the sun. By night she gave birth to it again. Her body glittered with stars, each one a soul, a god, or a traveller on an eternal journey. In temple walls and tomb ceilings, Nut was painted in deep blue, her skin spangled with gold. Beneath her curved form, the sun god Ra sailed his boat across the sky, following his daily path from east to west. When evening came, he descended into her mouth, entering the Duat, the underworld, to journey through darkness. There he faced chaos, serpents, and the trials of the unseen realm, before being reborn at dawn. The Egyptians believed that this cosmic cycle repeated endlessly. The same journey Ra took through the night was mirrored by every living being. Birth, death, and renewal, bound by divine rhythm. As the stars turned above, the people of Egypt watched them closely. Their nights were not spent in still ignorance of the heavens. They were careful observers, recording patterns that guided both daily life and sacred ritual. From the movements of stars and planets, they marked time, predicted the flooding of the Nile, and aligned their temples with mathematical precision. At Thebes, Memphis, and Heliopolis, priests known as Watchers of the Night Sky climbed to the roofs of temples after sunset. Lying on their backs, they traced the slow drift of stars along the horizon. They used a simple sighting instrument, a palm rib with a small slit called a merket, to mark alignments. With it, they divided the sky into hours, long before the invention of mechanical clocks. The concept of the star clock was born here. The priests identified deacon stars, small groups of constellations that rose at regular intervals through the night. Each deacon corresponded to a specific hour, so by watching which one rose, they could tell the time with remarkable accuracy. Lists of these stars were inscribed inside tombs, painted in rows above the coffins of kings. Celestial calendars to guide the soul through eternity. Among the constellations, several held special significance. The bright belt of Orion was recognized as Sa, the divine form of Osiris, lord of the afterlife. His presence in the heavens symbolized rebirth and order. Close to him shone the brilliant star Sopdet, known today as Sirius, the goddess Isis, whose rising each year foretold the coming of the Nile flood. Together, Osiris and Isis ruled the cosmic cycle of life, death, and renewal, the very essence of Egyptian belief. To the ancient farmer, the heliacal rising of Sirius, the moment it first appeared before dawn, after months of absence, was the signal that the inundation of the Nile was near. The event was celebrated with festivals and offerings. It marked the beginning of the new year, when the river's waters would rise to nourish the fields. Astronomy, religion, and agriculture were one seamless truth. Farther across the sky, another figure was recognized, the goddess Meskenet, guardian of birth and destiny, associated with the northern constellations that never set. These stars, called the imperishables, circled eternally around the pole, never dipping below the horizon. To the Egyptians, they were the souls of the righteous dead, rewarded with immortality in the sky. The pharaohs aspired to join them, becoming stars that would never fade. In the pyramid texts, some of the oldest religious writings in human history, the king speaks of his ascent to these undying stars. The sky is clear, the stars are brought to life. I sail through the sky as Ra in his rising. I am one of you, O imperishable stars, I shall not perish. Such words reveal the unity between heaven and earth in Egyptian thought. The stars were not distant objects of curiosity. They were destinations, companions, ancestors. Every glittering point of light was a continuation of life. Proof that death was not an ending, but a transformation. The study of the heavens shaped not only religion, but architecture. Temples and pyramids were aligned to celestial events with extraordinary precision. The Great Pyramid at Giza, for example, is oriented so that its sides face the cardinal directions almost perfectly. Its narrow shafts point toward Orion and the northern stars. A stone manifestation of the pharaoh's eternal voyage to the heavens. At Karnak, the great temple of Amun was aligned to the sunrise at the summer solstice. On that day, the first rays of the sun penetrated the temple's main axis, illuminating the sanctuary where the god's statue stood. This alignment was not coincidence. It was the deliberate merging of time, light, and divinity. Architecture as a calendar, a physical link between heaven and earth. At night, the priests walked through these same corridors by torchlight, their footsteps echoing between the columns. The walls around them were carved with images of stars, boats, and deities sailing through the celestial river. The ceilings of tombs, too, became maps of the sky. Nut arching overhead, her body adorned with constellations. To lie beneath such a ceiling in eternity was to rest forever beneath the night. In the city, ordinary people looked to the stars for simpler guidance. Farmers knew when to plant and harvest by their rising and setting. Travelers used them to navigate across the desert, following the bright northern constellations that never disappeared. Fishermen on the Nile learned to read the sky as naturally as they read the current, recognizing the position of certain stars to know when to cast their nets. Even the calendar of daily life reflected this celestial awareness. The Egyptian year was divided into 3 seasons: Achet, the flood; Peret, the emergence of land; and Shemu, the harvest. Each lasted 4 months, and each was linked to the movements of Sirius and the moon. Their months were lunar, beginning with the sighting of the new crescent. In this way, every human activity, from sowing grain to celebrating festivals, echoed the patterns of the heavens. The moon, too, was deeply revered. As the visible eye of Khonsu, it was seen as a guardian of night travelers and a counter to the darkness. Its phases were recorded carefully. Its fullness marked times of ceremony. In some temples, offerings were made when the moon rose, and hymns were sung to thank Khonsu for lighting the world when the sun rested. In one hymn preserved on papyrus, a priest writes, "Hail to you, Khonsu, traveller of the sky, whose shining face guides the lost. You measure the hours of night. You bring the cool breeze to the weary. Your rays are gentle, your heart eternal." Such verses reveal the intimacy the Egyptians felt with the cosmos. They were not passive observers, but participants in a vast, ordered universe. Every god had a place, every star a purpose, every movement a meaning. As the night stretched toward its midpoint, the sky became its brightest. In the deep stillness of the desert, the stars seemed almost close enough to touch. The priests atop the temples watched them move, noting their progression, whispering prayers as they crossed the meridian. They knew that this silent motion mirrored the heartbeat of the cosmos. Regular, dependable, divine. The ordinary people sleeping in their homes believed the same truth in simpler form. That as Ra journeyed through darkness, and as Nut bore him anew each dawn, so too would their own lives continue in endless renewal. The stars were proof of that promise. Steady lights in an eternal cycle. witnesses to both the life of the world and the lives of all who had ever looked upward. And so, through every Egyptian night the heavens turned. Ra sailed through the underworld, Nut stretched across creation, Osiris glowed in the belt of Orion, and Isis rose beside him to bring the flood and life once more. The stars were their temple, the sky their scripture, and the night their quiet teacher, infinite, ordered, eternal. Across the ancient land of Kemet, from the delta to the Nubian border, temples rose like vast instruments tuned to the heavens. They were not random constructions of stone and prayer. They were cosmic machines, designed to capture light, shadow, and time itself. Each temple was a reflection of the universe, a model of creation carved into limestone and granite. To the Egyptian builders and priests, architecture was theology made solid. Every wall, every corridor, every open court mirrored a part of the divine order. When they raised a temple, they were not simply building a place of worship. They were recreating the first moment of creation, when light emerged from the primeval waters of chaos. The great temple of Karnak, dedicated to Amun-Ra, stands as one of the clearest examples of this celestial design. Its immense axis, running from the river toward the east, was aligned with the rising sun at the time of the summer solstice. On that day each year, when dawn broke over the eastern horizon, the first golden rays streamed straight through the pylons, past the columns, and into the inner sanctuary. For a few perfect moments, light illuminated the statue of Amun, the god reborn, the sun renewed, the world restored. Such precision was not accidental. The ancient priests and architects studied the horizon for months, marking the point where the sun appeared, adjusting their plans until stone and light matched perfectly. They measured time not with gears or dials, but with shadows and stars. Their instruments were simple, yet their understanding profound. At night, Karnak transformed. Torches flickered between the columns of the hypostyle hall, and the air smelled faintly of oil, incense, and sandstone dust. The high ceilings, painted deep blue and speckled with golden stars, seemed to merge with the sky above. The priests would walk in silent processions, carrying small lamps and chanting hymns to the gods of the night. Khonsu, the moon god, Nut the sky, and Osiris, who ruled the unseen world. Sometimes, special night ceremonies were held when the moon was full. In these moments, the entire temple seemed alive with reflection. The white light of Khonsu, shimmering on the water-filled basins, glowing along the tips of carved hieroglyphs. Music echoed through the halls. Slow beats of drums, the hum of harps, the soft breath of flutes. These sounds were not performances for people. They were offerings to the universe, harmonies meant to sustain the cosmic balance of Maat. In Dendera, the temple of the goddess Hathor was another place where the union of astronomy and art reached perfection. Its ceilings still bear the Dendera zodiac, a magnificent carving of stars, planets, and constellations, an entire celestial map rendered in stone. Each figure represents a portion of the sky known to the Egyptians, mingled with influences from later Greek astronomy, yet its origin lies in far older observation. For the priests of Dendera, the night sky was Hathor's domain. She was the mistress of the West, the lady of music and love, but also the goddess of celestial harmony. Her temple mirrored her beauty, its columns crowned with her serene face, its walls engraved with endless processions of gods and stars. On festival nights, the priests would carry her sacred image to the roof to greet the rising moon, while the people below played sistrums, metal rattles that shimmered like starlight in sound. The roof of a temple was a sacred observatory. From there, priests traced the path of the planets, noting their positions relative to the constellations. They watched the helical rising of Sirius, the gradual shift of Orion, and the bright wanderings of Venus, known to them as the goddess Isis of the morning and evening. These observations were carefully recorded, not just for astronomical curiosity, but for ritual timing. Each festival, each rite, depended on celestial order. To honor the gods at the wrong time was to disturb the rhythm of creation. In the south, at Abu Simbel, another extraordinary alignment shows the Egyptians' mastery of light and stone. Carved deep into the cliffs by order of Pharaoh Ramses II, the great temple faces east. Twice a year, at the dawn of February and October, sunlight travels through the long entrance corridor and strikes the inner sanctuary, illuminating the statues of three gods, Amun-Ra, Ra-Herakti, and the deified Ramses himself, while leaving Ptah, the god of darkness, in shadow. This was no accident of design. It was a precise harmony between architecture and the sun's journey. A statement that even mountains could obey the rhythm of the cosmos. At night, when the tourists and noise of later ages are gone, that temple would have been utterly silent. The river below reflected the stars, and inside the sanctuary, the air would have been cool, heavy with the memory of sunlight. The colossal statues sat in darkness, vast and still, while the priests outside observed the sky, confident that their measurements and prayers kept Egypt's world in balance. This concept of divine geometry was everywhere. Even small village shrines followed the same cosmic plan. Their entrances faced the sunrise. Their walls were inscribed with star patterns. In the villages, people built their homes with doorways angled to catch the morning light, a reflection of the same sacred alignment. From the greatest temple to the humblest dwelling, the principle remained the same. Life must be built in harmony with the universe. The Egyptians understood the sky not only as a map of gods, but as a clock of eternity. They tracked time by the stars, the moon, and the flood of the Nile. The rising of Sirius announced the new year. The phases of the moon marked the months, and the position of Orion signaled the seasons of planting and harvest. But for all their precision, their astronomy was never merely scientific. It was devotional. To them, observation was a form of worship. Watching the stars was like listening to the gods breathe. Each flicker of light above had a purpose, and by understanding it, humanity could live in balance with the divine order that governed all things. In this way, Egyptian astronomy was not separate from myth. It was the language through which myth was expressed. The movements of planets and stars were seen as the visible actions of deities. Ra sailing his solar bark, Isis mourning over the dark horizon, Horus chasing Set across the sky. The heavens were not impersonal mechanics, but living stories, constantly retold through light and time. Some temples contained chambers, known as star rooms. These were small sanctuaries, with ceilings painted in dark blue and dotted with golden circles representing the constellations. Here, the priests performed rituals to renew the heavens. They recited hymns describing the voyage of Ra through the underworld and the triumph of light over chaos. To lie on the floor of such a chamber, surrounded by the stars in painted form, was to stand within the body of the goddess Nut herself, enclosed in the eternal sky. When the priests of Heliopolis, the city of the sun, looked upward at night, they imagined that the stars were the souls of former kings who had joined Ra's entourage in his solar boat. In their texts one finds lines of serene conviction. The king rises as the star of morning. He sails with Ra in the day boat. He rests with Ra in the night boat. His body is of gold, his bones of silver, his heart of lapis, shining forever. To these people, heaven was not a distant place. It was a continuation of the world, visible and immediate. The same stars that guided the priests also guided the farmers, the travellers, and the builders. Every class, every person shared the same sky. An equal inheritance of beauty and belief. And when those same priests performed the nightly temple rituals, extinguishing the lamps, closing the sanctuary doors, and offering words to the sleeping gods, they did so knowing that above them the universe kept turning. Ra was crossing the underworld, Nut was bearing the stars, Osiris watched from Orion, and Sirius, bright as a jewel, shone with the promise of another dawn. The Egyptians knew that the sun would rise again. It always did, but each night, as they looked upward, they saw eternity in motion, the breath of the gods made visible, the endless heartbeat of creation written in light. When the sun sank behind the western cliffs of Thebes, the living city gave way to another, a silent city of stone and memory. The ancient Egyptians called this side of the Nile Tajizer, the sacred land. To them, the West was the realm of completion, the place where the sun descended to begin its nightly voyage through the underworld. It was also the domain of the departed, where the spirits of kings, queens, and common people alike began their eternal journeys. As darkness fell, the air over the western bank cooled swiftly. The hot breath of day faded, replaced by the still chill of desert night. The cliffs glowed faintly in the moonlight, pale limestone catching the reflected shimmer of the sky. Below them, narrow paths wound between tomb entrances cut deep into the rock. This was the Valley of the Kings, the resting place of pharaohs. Thebes slept across the river. But here, the night was absolute. No sound of markets or laughter reached these canyons. Only the whisper of wind through the wadi, the distant cry of a desert owl, and the faint hum of the river below reminded one that life still moved somewhere far away. For the Egyptians, this silence was not emptiness. It was reverence. The tombs were not graves as we think of them. They were portals, carefully constructed passages between worlds. Each wall, each color, each symbol was chosen with purpose. To guide the soul, the Ka, safely through the darkness of the underworld and into eternal life. Inside these tombs, the walls are alive with scenes. By lamplight they seem to flicker. figures of gods and kings, shifting gently as shadows move. The ceilings are painted deep blue, dotted with golden stars, imitating the heavens above. Along the corridors, hieroglyphs describe the journey of Ra's solar bark through the Duat, the underworld passing through 12 gates, one for each hour of night. The Book of Gates, the Book of the Dead, and the Amduat, these were not merely texts but roadmaps of the afterlife. They told the story of the sun god's voyage through the darkness and his triumph over the serpent Apophis, the embodiment of chaos. Just as Ra overcame darkness each night to rise again at dawn, so too would the deceased triumph over death to rise in a new world of light. The tomb builders of Deir el-Medina, the small village on the western bank where artisans lived, knew this cycle intimately. They spent their days carving and painting these eternal corridors. Their lives were devoted to preparing homes for eternity, shaping stories into stone. At night, they returned to their own modest dwellings, ate bread and lentils, drank beer, and told stories of the kings whose tombs they built. It is said that even after their day's labor ended, the builders often looked back toward the cliffs before sleeping. They would see the faint glimmer of oil lamps where guards or priests tended to the tombs, tiny stars flickering along the rock face, mirroring the heavens above. It was as if the sky had descended to earth, the constellations etched not in light, but in stone. Within the tombs, priests and embalmers performed rituals meant to preserve the body and ensure the soul's passage. The process of mummification was a sacred art, carried out with precision and prayer. Every motion had meaning. The removal of organs, the drying with natron, the anointing with oils. All were done under the watchful eyes of the gods. To the Egyptians, the body was the house of the soul. It had to be preserved, not for nostalgia, but for functionality. Without a body, the car could not recognize its earthly home. Without a name inscribed in stone, the person could vanish from existence entirely. Thus, to speak the name of the dead was to keep them alive. The hieroglyphs carved along the tomb walls were not decoration. They were lifelines. The priests recited prayers as they worked, invoking Anubis, the jackal-headed god of embalming and guardian of the dead. He was believed to oversee every step, ensuring purity and precision. They also called upon Isis and Nephthys, the sisters who mourned for Osiris, symbolizing divine compassion and protection. By day, the work was methodical. By night, it became spiritual. The tombs lit by oil lamps filled with the scent of resin, cedar, and incense. The flicker of light made the painted gods appear to breathe. The workers spoke in hushed tones, aware that they were in the company of eternity. When the tomb was complete, the opening of the mouth ceremony would be performed. This ritual, one of the most ancient in Egypt, was believed to restore the deceased's senses in the afterlife, to let them breathe, speak, and eat once again. A priest, often wearing a mask of Anubis, touched the mouth and eyes of the mummy or statue with a special tool, reenacting the divine restoration of life. Once sealed, the tomb became a private universe. The walls told stories for no human audience. The food offerings, perfumes, and treasures inside were not meant to be seen again. Everything was for the journey, a symbolic recreation of the world in miniature. Outside, the cliffs absorbed centuries of sunlight and cooled again at night, exhaling heat like ancient lungs. The valley's shape, narrow, enclosed, and silent, amplified the sense of mystery. Even the wind seemed cautious here. The moonlight traced the edges of stone doorways and the broken tips of columns, revealing the faint carvings of names that once shone in gold leaf. High above, the stars mirrored the tombs below. The Egyptians believed that when a king died, his soul ascended to the heavens to join the imperishable stars, the northern constellations that never set. Thus the Valley of the Kings was both an earthly necropolis and a celestial map, a reflection of the heavens carved into the desert's bones. Farther north, in Saqqara and Abydos, similar rituals unfolded through the ages. Each burial mirrored the same myth, the death and resurrection of Osiris. The pharaoh was Osiris on earth, and in death he became Osiris in spirit. The tomb was his womb of rebirth, from which he would emerge renewed as the sun rises each morning. In this vision, night was not a symbol of fear, but of transformation. The Egyptians did not dread the darkness. They revered it as the necessary passage through which all creation must pass. To them, the sun's journey through the duat each night was proof that light could never be destroyed, only hidden, only waiting to return. The Book of the Dead described it as a journey of trial and triumph. The deceased faced gates guarded by divine beings, each demanding the knowledge of secret names and truths. The heart of the dead would be weighed against the feather of Ma'at. If found pure, the soul would pass on to the field of reeds, a perfect mirror of Egypt, where crops grew endlessly, waters were calm, and family was reunited forever. In this paradise, night and day coexisted in harmony. There was no fear, no decay. The stars above were the souls of those who had achieved peace. The field of reeds was the promise that no one was ever truly gone. They had merely changed form, moving from one realm of light to another. When the priests sealed a tomb for the final time, they left behind a world complete in itself. The corridors were filled with offerings, baskets of grain, pottery, flowers, and miniature models of servants and boats. Small armies ready to serve the dead in the afterlife. The doorway was closed with stone, plastered and inscribed with warnings to the unworthy. Then silence. The desert reclaimed the night. Sand whispered over the paths. The stars moved slowly overhead. The priests returned across the river to Thebes, leaving behind the eternal quiet of the west. To this day, when the wind passes through the Valley of the Kings, it carries with it the same deep stillness, a memory of chants, of prayers spoken to eternity. The tombs remain as they were intended, bridges between worlds, houses of night, sanctuaries where the living once touched the eternal and built their faith into the bones of the earth. On the slope above the western bank of the Nile, nestled between cliffs and desert, lay a small walled village, Deir el-Medina, the home of the artisans who built the tombs of the pharaohs. By day, this place was filled with the sounds of life and labor. The tap of chisels echoed across the valley, hammers struck limestone, and the air shimmered with dust. The men of the village were craftsmen, painters, and sculptors, specialists trusted with the most sacred task in Egypt, preparing the eternal resting places of kings. But at night, Deir el-Medina became a place of rare peace. The tools were set down, the noise ceased, and only the soft voices of families filled the still air. The stars stretched high above, the same stars that guided their work and promised the continuation of life beyond death. The village was small, perhaps 70 or 80 houses built of mud brick, arranged along narrow lanes. The walls were close together, sheltering the people from the wind that swept down from the cliffs. In the evening, families gathered outside their doorways, sitting on mats woven from reeds. They shared food, lentil stew, bread, onions, beer, and talked in quiet tones. For these workers, the day's labor was more than a profession. It was devotion. To carve the name of a pharaoh, to paint the figure of a god, was to touch eternity. Yet they also understood the fragility of life. The cliffs they carved into were filled not only with royal tombs, but with the knowledge of mortality. Every stroke of the chisel reminded them that time moved both in stone and in flesh. When darkness settled, the desert cooled. The workers lit small oil lamps filled with castor oil or animal fat, each with a wick made of twisted linen. Their yellow light flickered softly along the plastered walls of their homes, illuminating painted household shrines. Every family had such a shrine, a niche holding small clay or wooden figures of protective gods. Bes, the dwarf god of laughter and protection, Taweret, the hippo goddess of childbirth, and sometimes Anubis, guardian of the necropolis. Offerings of bread, beer, or flowers rested beside them. To these humble deities, the people of Deir el-Medina whispered prayers for safety and rest. The workers had their own priests and scribes, men who served as both spiritual and administrative leaders. At night, the scribe might read aloud a hymn to the assembled families, verses from the Book of the Dead or prayers to the sun god for renewal. The sound of his voice would rise softly into the night air, mingling with the rustle of the desert wind. In the stillness beyond the village walls, the cliffs loomed, silent, immense. Somewhere within them, the unfinished corridors of tombs waited. Some nights guards watched over those entrances, their torches casting orange light against the pale stone. They were protectors not only of the royal dead, but of the workers' sacred craft. For the tombs were treasures of both art and faith. Among the villagers, stories passed from generation to generation. They spoke of dreams and omens, of ancestors appearing to offer advice, of gods visiting in sleep to reveal secrets. For the Egyptians, dreams were not imagination. They were a channel between worlds. A good dream might be recorded on a small ostracon, a shard of limestone or pottery, and kept as a charm. A troubling dream might be taken to a temple for interpretation. The people of Deir el-Medina also believed in the power of names. Every word carved, every symbol written was alive. To erase a name was to erase existence. To speak a name was to give life anew. Thus, even in their small community, the written word carried divine weight. The scribes kept meticulous records of their days, wages, food rations, disputes, all preserved in ink and limestone. These records survive even now, whispering the details of lives lived thousands of years ago. As the night deepened, a faint coolness descended. The children fell asleep first, wrapped in linen cloth beneath the low roofs of their homes. The older villagers sat in the doorways, watching the stars. The Milky Way shone like a white road across the sky. To them, it was the heavenly Nile, the path along which the souls of the righteous sailed. The men who carved the tombs often spoke of that river. They believed that one day they too would cross it, not by boat of wood and oar, but by the strength of their devotion and their deeds. The concept of Maat governed even this small village. Truth, balance, order, justice. A man who lived by Maat would not perish. His soul would sail forever in peace, joining the imperishable stars above. Some nights, the village celebrated small festivals in honor of Hathor or Meretzega, the local serpent goddess who protected the Theban mountains. Offerings of bread, figs, and beer were placed outside the houses, and songs were sung softly into the night. They did not fear the desert spirits. They sought to honor them, to live in harmony with all that surrounded them. On rare occasions, when a craftsman or his wife died, the whole community gathered for the funerary procession. The body, wrapped in linen and adorned with amulets, was carried toward the cliffs under the light of the setting sun. Women wove garlands of lotus flowers, men carried small torches, and the sound of chanting filled the air. To witness death in Deir el-Medina was to see belief made visible. The certainty that the journey continued beyond the horizon. After the procession returned, the living would sit in quiet remembrance. In their dreams that night, many claimed to hear the voices of their ancestors, gentle, approving, present. In the Egyptian mind, the line between life and afterlife was never absolute. The spirits of the departed lingered close, protective and familiar, woven into the rhythm of the village like the stars woven into the sky. The priests of the necropolis believed that every act of devotion, every stroke of paint on a tomb wall, every hymn whispered into the desert air, helped sustain the balance of the cosmos. Their work was not merely for the dead, it was for all of creation. To maintain Ma'at through ritual and craftsmanship was to ensure that the sun would rise, the Nile would flood, and the world would remain whole. As midnight approached, silence reclaimed the village. The torches dimmed, the last whispers faded, only the night insects sang, their soft tones echoing faintly between the mud-brick walls. In the distance, a single torch still flickered on the path to the valley. A guard making his rounds among the tomb entrances. Above him, the cliffs rose dark against the stars, ancient and solemn. Within them, the painted corridors waited in silence, holding the stories of kings, the songs of priests, the prayers of artisans. The stars shone down as they had for millennia, bright, patient, eternal. Deir el-Medina slept. The world of the living and the world of the dead rested side by side, separated by stone and shadow, yet bound by the same truth. That in Egypt, night was not an ending, but a continuation. A quiet pause in the eternal rhythm of life. Before dawn, the village still slept beneath a canopy of stars. The desert held its breath, and the cliffs above Deir el-Medina loomed as dark silhouettes against a faint silver sky. The world hovered between night and day, between the silence of dreams and the stir of waking life. Then, slowly, light began to bloom on the horizon. The first glow of Ra's rebirth brushed the edges of the Theban hills, spilling pale fire across the stone. The stars retreated, fading like whispered prayers answered. In that sacred moment, the sun was not merely a star returning. It was the resurrection of order, of Mayat, the promise that creation still endured. Within the mud-brick walls, the village began to stir. A door creaked open. A rooster cried out, sharp against the hush. Thin smoke rose from small hearths as women bent to light their morning fires, feeding them with dry reeds and handfuls of dung. The smell of smoke mingled with baking bread and the faint sweetness of brewing beer. Children rubbed sleep from their eyes as their mothers wrapped them in linen tunics. A pot clattered. Someone laughed softly. Even these small sounds, the rattle of clay jars, the crackle of kindling, felt like part of the greater rhythm of life returning. The men emerged one by one into the cool air, their faces lit by the first touch of sunlight. They tied simple headcloths to shield against the heat to come, slung their leather water skins across their shoulders, and gathered their tools. Chisels, hammers, pigment boxes, mallets smooth from years of use. The air shimmered faintly with the smell of stone dust and oil. At the edge of the village, the path to the valley awaited. It wound upward through the cliffs, where the royal tombs slept unfinished in the rock. The men set out in small groups, walking in silence at first, each step measured, each breath drawn with purpose. They followed the same route their fathers and grandfathers had walked, a procession of devotion repeated for generations. The desert stretched vast and pale around them, and the cliffs ahead glowed gold in the newborn light. From this place, one could look down and glimpse the Nile, a narrow, gleaming band in the distance, winding through the green floodplain like a vein of life. To the people of Deir el-Medina, it was both anchor and horizon, the symbol of renewal, the earthly reflection of the celestial river above. As they climbed, one man murmured a prayer to Ptah, the great craftsman who shaped the world from clay. Another touched a small amulet of Taweret hanging from a leather cord, a charm his wife had given him before his first day of work years ago. Their faith was not distant or grand. It was woven into every breath, every gesture, every step toward the valley. When they reached the work site, the foreman and scribes were already waiting. The scribe, seated cross-legged on a low stool, unrolled his papyrus and began to call the names of the day's workers. He recorded each one carefully, marking attendance as he had done countless mornings before. His reed brush scratched softly, each stroke a reminder that memory itself was sacred, that to write was to preserve the soul. Then, with the rising of the full sun, the valley came alive. The cliffs echoed with the tap of hammers and the ring of chisels. Fine dust lifted into the air, catching the light like a veil of gold. In the deep corridors of the tombs, men worked by the glow of oil lamps, their shadows flickering across the walls where gods and pharaohs took shape in pigment and relief. the painters ground minerals into colour. Red ochre for skin, lapis for heaven, green malachite for renewal. They mixed them with water and gum, their fingers steady, their touch precise. Each stroke was prayer, each symbol a bridge between worlds. To paint the figure of a god was to lend that god breath. To carve a name was to secure eternity. They laboured with devotion, yet they were human still. In pauses between strokes they shared quiet words, small jokes, memories of home. The laughter of one man echoed faintly down the corridor. Not irreverence, but life asserting itself within the solemn halls of death. By midday, the sun stood high and merciless. The men retreated to the shade of an overhang, where a cool wind flowed from the valley. They ate their rations, coarse bread, dried fish, onions and figs, and drank from clay jars filled with thick, sweet beer. A scribe, his voice calm and measured, read aloud a hymn to Ra, giving thanks for the day's light and strength. Others listened in silence, eyes closed, the sun bright on their faces. When the meal was done, they returned to their labour. The rhythm of their tools resumed, steady and eternal. The tombs deepened, their walls adorned with scenes of journey and judgment, of the weighing of the heart and the voyage across the celestial Nile. These artisans were not merely builders of monuments. They were architects of belief, giving form to the unseen. As the sun began its descent, the heat softened and long shadows crept along the valley floor. The foreman's voice rose again, signaling the day's end. The chisels fell silent. The men gathered their tools, wiped the sweat and dust from their faces, and began the slow walk homeward. Along the path, the cliffs glowed crimson, the same colour as the setting sun mirrored in the Nile far below. The air was filled with the faint scent of stone and heat, fading now into the cool promise of evening. Some men carried small fragments of limestone, ostraca, on which they would later sketch or write, perhaps a message to a friend, perhaps a dream recorded for the gods. When they reached Deir el-Medina, the village was alive once more. Children ran to meet them, laughter ringing between the narrow walls. Women set out clay bowls of stew and bread, and the smell of roasted lentils filled the air. The day's labourers washed the dust from their hands and feet, pouring water over themselves from simple jars, watching it darken the dry earth below. The sun slipped behind the western cliffs, the land of the dead, and the sky deepened into violet. Lamps were lit, voices softened. The artisans sat in their doorways, eating in quiet companionship, watching the first stars appear above the desert's edge. They knew that tomorrow the cycle would begin again. Dawn, work, devotion, rest. But this was not repetition without meaning. To them, each day's return was renewal, each sunset a passage through death and back again. The work of their hands was the mirror of the sun's journey. Labour and resurrection, creation and stillness, all bound in the eternal law of Ma'at. And so, as darkness gathered and the torches flickered, the people of Deir el-Medina looked once more to the stars. The same stars that had guided their ancestors, that watched over kings and commoners alike. They shone steady, patient, eternal. The artisans of the western hills closed their eyes beneath their glow, knowing that when dawn came again, they would rise once more, not merely to work, but to worship, to carve the shape of eternity into the heart of the stone. When the men of Deir el-Medina rose before dawn to walk toward the cliffs, the heart of the village remained alive behind them. It was the women who tended that heart, keepers of the home, of flame, of prayer. Though they did not carve stone or paint the walls of kings, their work was no less sacred. They shaped the living world that sustained those who shaped eternity. Within the narrow lanes, the morning air was filled with the soft sounds of daily life. Grinding stones turned in slow rhythm as hands crushed barley and emmer wheat into flour. Clay jars clinked as they were lifted and carried from the wells. The smell of baking bread drifted between the walls, warm and comforting, mingling with the tang of smoke and the sweetness of dates drying in the sun. The women of the village worked in the open doorways of their homes, their linen dresses pale against the ochre walls. Some hummed old songs as they ground grain. Others laughed as they tended small fires or stirred clay pots of lentil stew. Children played nearby, chasing one another through the dust, their laughter mingling with the bleating of goats. Inside each house, the rhythm of care continued, sweeping, weaving, tending, preparing. The homes were small, but alive with colour. Painted niches, woven mats, pottery decorated with patterns of lotus and papyrus. In the corner of nearly every room stood a household shrine, its plastered niche painted with bright pigments faded by time. Here, the women offered prayers to the gods who watched over daily life. There was Bes, the dwarf god with the lion's face, protector of childbirth and laughter. His figure was carved crudely but with affection, his grin fierce and kind. Bes was the guardian of the threshold, the keeper of joy in the midst of labor. Beside him stood Taweret, the pregnant hippopotamus goddess, fierce mother and defender of the vulnerable. Around her small clay image, the women placed offerings of flowers, bits of bread, or drops of beer, tokens of gratitude and hope. In the dim light of morning, women whispered prayers as they laid their offerings. Protect my child, mighty one of birth. Guard this house, bring peace to those within. Their faith was constant and quiet, woven into every act. The kneading of dough, the lighting of a lamp, the mending of cloth. The village had its midwives and wise women too. They carried small amulets tied with string, and they knew the herbs that soothed pain, the oils that calmed fever. When a woman labored in childbirth, her sisters gathered around her, singing softly to summon the goddess's protection. They burned incense, waved cooling fans, and laid lotus petals by the bed. The cries of new life echoed through the lanes. A reminder that even in a village of tomb builders, life itself was the holiest work of all. When the day grew hot and the men labored deep in the cliffs, the women carried on their own crafts. Some wove linen cloth from flax fibers, twisting the threads on simple looms. Others made baskets from reeds gathered near the river, or shaped small clay figurines, images of gods, animals, or spirits of protection. These objects, humble in form, carried immense meaning. Many of them would one day be placed in tombs as offerings, their maker's hands leaving an invisible mark on eternity. The women also tended to the needs of the community. They visited one another freely, sharing food and gossip, comfort and laughter. When illness struck a household, neighbors brought jars of soup or water, sat beside the sick, and prayed together, in a place so small, where every face was familiar. No one was left alone in sorrow or joy. At midday, when the sun burned high, the streets fell silent. Curtains of woven reeds hung across doorways to keep the heat at bay. Within the cool dimness of their homes, mothers told stories to their children. Tales of Osiris and Isis, of the journey through the underworld, of the sun's nightly passage through darkness and rebirth. Through these stories, the children learned the rhythm that bound all things, that nothing truly ended, that all life was part of a vast and ordered cycle. In the evening, when the men returned from the valley, the women met them at the gates, carrying jars of water to wash away the dust. They listened as their husbands spoke of the day's labor, of new chambers carved, of pigments mixed, of strange shapes glimpsed in the stone. Though they did not see the tombs themselves, the women knew them through these stories. They could picture the painted walls, the golden figures, the sacred names written in ink. Through their men's hands, they too helped create the afterlife. As darkness fell, lamps were lit once more. The women tended the flames carefully, filling each small vessel with oil, twisting the linen wicks, touching them with fire until the light bloomed soft and yellow. The glow danced on the plastered walls, revealing the painted faces of the gods. Sometimes, after the evening meal, the scribe or priest of the village would visit a household to read aloud hymns or prayers. The women and children gathered close to listen, their faces illuminated by the lamplight. The words spoke of renewal, of the sun's rebirth, of the heart's weighing in the hall of truth. For the women of Deir el-Medina, these were not distant mysteries. They were reflections of their own lives, of birth and nurturing, and the daily tending of balance within the home. On festival nights, the village came alive with color and sound. Women decorated their hair with lotus petals and wore necklaces of faience beads that glimmered in the lamplight. They sang songs to Hathor, goddess of love and music, whose laughter filled the desert with beauty. Offerings were placed before the doorways, bread, figs, beer, and the people danced together in the narrow streets. Children clapped their hands, men clapped in rhythm. The air pulsed with joy, devotion, and the knowledge that even celebration was a form of prayer. Yet in quiet moments, the women also faced loss. When death came, as it did, gently or suddenly to every home, it was the women who prepared the body. They washed it, wrapped it in linen, placed amulets over the heart. Their hands were steady, their tears soft. They sang low hymns of passage, their voices carrying through the night like the murmur of water. In those moments they were priestesses, bridging the worlds of the living and the dead. For they understood as deeply as any scribe or craftsman that life and death were not opposites, but companions. The act of mourning was also the act of renewal. The tending of the dead was a continuation of the love that had filled the living house. When the night grew still and the lamps burned low, the women sat quietly beside their sleeping children, watching the stars beyond the doorway. The Milky Way shimmered above, the heavenly Nile, along which souls sailed forever. They whispered the names of their ancestors, keeping them alive with each breath. In the silence between heartbeats, they could almost hear the desert breathe. The vast, eternal rhythm that held them all. And so, though their world was small, a handful of houses between cliffs and sand, the women of Deir el-Medina carried within them the same sacred order that governed the stars. Their hands shaped the clay of daily life. Their voices kept the songs of eternity. Through them, the pulse of the village endured, warm, human, eternal. Before the first chisel struck stone, before the artisans lifted their hammers, the day began in ink. In a small chamber near the center of the village, the scribes of Deir el-Medina sat cross-legged on reed mats, their brushes poised above smooth flakes of limestone and rolls of papyrus. The air smelled faintly of soot and gum, the scent of creation made visible. They worked in silence at first, save for the soft scratch of reed against its surface. Lines of black and red ink took shape with patient precision. Each mark was deliberate, each symbol balanced in form and meaning. To the scribe, a single line carried the weight of eternity. The written word was a living thing, born from the breath of the gods themselves. In ancient Egypt, to speak a name was to give it life, but to write it was to make it everlasting. The scribes of Deir el-Medina knew this truth deeply. Every ration tallied, every record of a dispute or prayer written in their neat hands was more than administration. It was remembrance. It was order. It was Ma'at expressed in ink. Their chamber was simple. A low bench, a few shelves lined with jars of pigment and rolls of papyrus. A small window through which morning light streamed in golden beams. Yet within that modest space, entire worlds were preserved. Lists of tools, accounts of offerings, hymns to Amun and Hathor, personal letters, all recorded with the same care. One of the senior scribes, a man named Ka, dipped his reed brush into a small dish of black ink. He paused, lifting his eyes toward the doorway, where the sound of distant hammering echoed faintly from the cliffs. "Each strike of their tools," he murmured, "is an act of devotion. Ours is no different." Then he bent once more to his work. On his ostrakon, a shard of white limestone, he wrote, "Day 3 of the month of Akhet. Bread rations distributed. 1 measure to each worker of the crew of the tomb. Ma'at is upheld. Order endures." The ink dried quickly in the heat, sealing the record like a prayer. In the village, the scribes held positions of quiet power. They were the keepers of truth, mediators, accountants, teachers, and priests. When disputes arose over rations or labor, it was the scribe who heard the words of both sides and set them down. When a craftsman fell ill or a child was born, he recorded it. When the gods were honored in festival, he wrote their praises so that even time would remember. But their duties reached beyond the living. The scribes also served the dead. They copied hymns from the Book of the Dead, painted spells on tomb walls, and wrote the sacred words that would guide a soul through the underworld. They knew the names of every gate and guardian in the afterlife, every trial that awaited the heart of man. In their hands, the boundary between worlds became thin, ink bridging the seen and unseen. Sometimes, as the afternoon heat deepened, one might hear the murmur of a scribe reciting from memory, "I have not stolen, I have not lied, I have not caused pain." These were the confessions of the righteous soul, the words to be spoken before Osiris in the Hall of Truth. To write such words was to reaffirm them, to weave them into the pattern of the universe itself. Beyond their chamber, children of the village gathered beneath the shade of a sycamore tree to learn from a younger scribe. They sat cross-legged in the dust, scratching crude hieratic signs onto broken pottery shards. A good scribe, their teacher told them, is a builder of worlds. The chisel shapes stone, but the brush shapes time. The children repeated the phrase with laughter, not yet grasping its weight. But someday, perhaps one of them would take up the brush and carry the memory of the village forward. When the sun climbed high, the scribes set down their brushes and stepped outside to rest. They looked toward the cliffs, their eyes tracing the unseen tombs hidden within. To them, each chamber was a text, walls of stone inscribed with prayer, color, and faith. The artisans carved, but it was the scribes who gave those carvings voice. Without the word, the image would remain silent. Without the image, the word would fade unseen. Together, they formed a single act of worship. Labor and language, stone and ink. In the evenings, when the men returned from their work and lamps were lit, the scribes often walked through the village, visiting doorways where families sat beneath the stars. They read aloud from old hymns, their voices steady and melodic. "Hail to thee, Ra, who risest in the horizon, strong in thy radiance, beautiful in thy light. Thou renewest the world, thou makest the hearts of men to rejoice. When thou settest, the earth sleeps in peace." Children listened wide-eyed, the glow of oil lamps flickering on their faces. Women nodded in quiet reverence. The words, though ancient, felt alive, carrying warmth into the cool desert night. The scribes were not only keepers of records, but also of dreams. In a place where the boundary between the living and the dead was thin, dreams were treated as messages, whispers from ancestors, glimpses of the divine. Villagers often brought their dreams to the scribes for interpretation. The scribe would listen patiently, eyes half closed, and then consult his scrolls or memory. "It is a good omen," he might say. "The god Amun has heard your prayer." Or, if the dream was troubling, he would inscribe it on a small ostracon and instruct the dreamer to bury it beneath the threshold. A ritual of release, letting the fear return to the earth. Among their many records, the scribes also kept accounts of the unseen, the small miracles and signs that marked their world. A sudden gust of wind in the tomb corridor might be noted as the breath of the gods. The cry of a hawk overhead might be recorded as the messenger of Horus. To them, nothing was without meaning. Every gesture of nature was a line in the divine text of existence. As night fell, their brushes were cleaned, their scrolls rolled and tied with twine. The ink, ground from soot and gum, was covered to keep it moist. One by one, the scribes left their chamber, stepping into the cool air. The desert wind carried the faint scent of oil lamps and cooking fires. They walked among the narrow streets, hearing laughter from within the houses, the cry of a baby, the quiet murmur of prayer. All of it, they knew, would one day become memory. And memory would become eternity. Before sleep, a scribe might step outside his home, holding a small lamp in his hand. He would gaze up at the stars, the same sky that had watched over the builders of pyramids, over dynasties now dust. He would whisper, "The words endure," and indeed they did. For long after the fires of Deir el-Medina faded, after the voices of its people fell silent, the words remained, carved in stone, painted on walls, written on shards of limestone. Through them, the village still speaks, of devotion and duty, of faith and the fragile beauty of human hands shaping eternity. In the stillness of the desert, the wind carries faint echoes, not of hammer or chisel, but of ink on stone. The voices of the scribes whisper across time. Mayat endures. The word endures. We endure. The years passed like the slow drift of sand. Seasons rose and fell across the cliffs of Thebes, and the rhythm of Deir el-Medina continued. Day into night, labor into rest, prayer into silence. The same sun rose over the western hills. The same wind swept through the narrow lanes, and the same hands shaped stone and ink in devotion. Yet time, even in Egypt, does not stand still. The artisans grew old. Their children took up the chisels. Their daughters tended the hearths. The scribes' hands, once steady, trembled slightly as they wrote. Some who had built the tombs of pharaohs now rested within smaller tombs of their own, nestled in the very cliffs they once carved. The cycle endured, the living becoming the ancestors guarding the living. But far beyond the village walls, the world was changing. Dynasties shifted like the desert winds. Kings came and went, their names rising in glory, then fading into silence. The Valley of the Kings received its final pharaohs, and the gods of old Egypt began to speak more softly, their temples quieter, their songs fewer. Still, in Deir el-Medina, the people worked, even when the grain deliveries grew late. When the rations thinned and the desert seemed to creep closer, they kept their faith. The men still walked the path to the cliffs each morning. The women still lit their lamps at dusk. The scribes still recorded each day, the ink flowing as steadily as the Nile below. And then, one year, the work ceased. The tombs were finished, the kings entombed. The doors of the necropolis were sealed with stone. The valley fell silent, save for the whisper of wind through the empty corridors. One by one, the families of Deir el-Medina gathered what they could carry. Small jars, blankets, figures of Bez and Taweret. And they departed. Some went toward the river, seeking new homes along its fertile banks. Others vanished into the endless sweep of desert. The village they left behind did not die. It remained half buried in sand and memory, its walls crumbling but still warm with the echoes of human life. The painted shrines faded beneath dust, the tools rusted, the papyrus turned brittle. Yet even in ruin, the village held its spirit, the rhythm of devotion etched into every stone. Centuries passed, the world turned, empires rose upon the bones of others. The language of the artisans was forgotten, their gods turned to myth. Yet beneath the cliffs of Thebes, the desert guarded its secret. When, at last, the sand was cleared away, and the light of another age touched those old walls again, the voices of Deir el-Medina returned. On shards of limestone, their words still spoke. Records of bread, of dreams, of prayers whispered into the night. On the walls of tombs, the colours still glowed, reds and blues as bright as the day they were laid. The names endured. Archaeologists uncovered their village stone by stone, uncovering not a ruin, but a heartbeat preserved. Here were the marks of the hammer, the brush, the pen, the signatures of those who had once lived by the law of Mayat. Every tool, every inscription, every household shrine was a fragment of eternity, carried across time not by kings, but by the hands of ordinary people. They had not sought immortality through conquest or gold, but through devotion, through the perfection of craft, the care of family, the balance of the world within and beyond their walls. In the silence of the modern desert, their spirit lingers still. When night falls over the western hills, the air feels heavy with memory. The cliffs, once ringing with the sound of chisels, now echo only with wind. Yet in that wind, one might almost hear the faint rhythm of their labour, the murmur of their prayers, the laughter of their children beneath the stars. The villagers of Deir el-Medina believed that to speak a name was to make it live again. And so, when their names are read aloud, when a scribe's note is studied, when a craftsman's sketch is seen, when a woman's household shrine is uncovered from the dust, life returns. The eternal rhythm stirs once more. The sun still rises over the western hills. The desert still breathes. The stars still shine above the sleeping cliffs. And somewhere, beyond time, the artisans and their families rest together, their souls sailing along the heavenly Nile, carried by the same light that once guided their hands. For in Egypt, nothing truly ends. Stone remembers, ink endures, and life, like the river, always returns. Deir el-Medina sleeps still, not in silence, but in the quiet heartbeat of eternity.